Okay, we're going to get started here. My name is Jonathan Paskey, one of the co-founders of DataWeek and API World, and we had a replacement last minute here. I am going to be filling in as a moderator, but we have a great panel here today for the emergence of data-driven customer profiles. I'm going to go down the line one by one if they can just introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Phil, on the end, and we'll come this way.
Great. Good afternoon. I'm Phil Davis. I'm with Rapleaf. Rapleaf helps our customers get the data they need. We provide data tied to email addresses so that they could get to know their customers and create a more engaged experience. You could go to rapleaf.com to learn more. We'll talk about other things today.
Hi, I'm Shashi Upadhyay. I'm the CEO of Lattice. Lattice is a provider of data-driven applications for sales and marketing. And that means bringing all the data in the world to bear to sales and marketing problems and using the most modern data science techniques to predict what's likely to happen next and therefore recommend actions.
Hi, I'm Andy McMillan. I'm the general manager for Data.com, which is a business unit of Salesforce.com, designing cloud data solutions for CRM.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Noam Reininger. I'm with Dun & Bradstreet, and I lead our data as a service and our data management business.
Okay, so our original moderator wanted to talk about the 360 view, so I'm going to keep to what we were going to talk about before regarding customers and the consumer and customer profile context. And what I'd like to ask each of you is sort of in like a 2-minute context. What do you think of the 360-degree view of customer profiles? And if you feel or don't feel strongly about this question regarding sort of customer profiles, just let us know and kind of surveying. And what we'll do after that is kind of survey the audience and see what they think. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. So when you're talking about the 360 view of a customer, what you really need to do is put it back into the context of what does it mean to each of you in your day-to-day. So whether you're focused on B2B, B2C, or maybe you're trying to figure out how we could use data to address global warming or cure cancer. It's all about getting the data that you need in order to, and get it all in one place, in order to draw the conclusions from that data, right? And then make that data actionable. So when I think about 360, and you bring it back to that, whether it's B2B or B2C, it's really about understanding what are the data fields and data points that help you move the needle and make a difference to your business, and how do you get access to those, right? The biggest pitfall in 360 is saying, I want to know everything about the customer, okay, investing in getting everything about the customer, or asking the customer, and then not using the data. So that's kind of high level my thoughts there.
Yeah. Shashi?
Okay. We believe that C360-degree view is absolutely essential, but it should be driven by what problem you're trying to solve. So completeness of every possible data source you could gather in the universe is probably not as important as working back from, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to score leads? Are you trying to find new customers? Are you trying to understand who's actually likely to respond to a campaign? And once you've figured out what those questions are that are important to you, the data sources kind of suggest themselves. So you end up having to, work with some sources of internal data and some sources of external data, including data that's on the web, social data, and so on. And when you combine that, you can actually get a lot out of the exercise.
So I think, from my perspective, the 360-degree view of the customer was originally a CRM term designed not so much about the data itself, but this perspective that as you work with customers across different departments and different touch points where those groups aligned, sure, right? So whether it was sales or service or marketing. And so I think Phil's exactly right when he talks about, defining a set of fields and information that you care about for a customer. I also think it's about looking across your organization and figuring out, as we have these multiple touch points, are we aligning the right data and information that each one of those touch points need and have, so that a customer has a consistent experience. I think that's a little bit more of maybe a customer-centric view of a 360 than maybe a data-centric view.
Okay. No?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we see it as essential as well. And it's really around the insight to make that next decision. So the first step in that really is around identity resolution and having that clear view of who the customer is. From there, it's deciding what the key data points are. So that's internal data, history about that customer, external data such as firmographics, social data as well. And then 3 is really the processes and tools to keep that data refreshed and up to date.
Okay. Let's start talking about a few topics relating to customer data. One, we've got customer provided data, data that you get directly from the customer rather than scraping or other methods. And there's a big issue there with accuracy on that side as well. Can one of you, and then we can kind of have a discussion, speak to sort of the accuracy of customer provided data from the customer themselves and how that sort of plays into, you know, the monetization, the selling of that data too? Yeah. Phil? Phil?
So from a customer data perspective, I think the accuracy depends on the use of the data, right? And so, you know, really when you ask a customer for the data, if they trust the brand and you're giving them the right reason for giving you the data, it's going to be accurate. You know, companies that don't have great brand equity and great trust, people are going to maybe give the wrong information in order to try to, you know, spend time on their website if that's the case. So when you think about from an accuracy perspective, it's all about, you know, what's the value you're giving back to that customer? You know, we talk a lot about, you know, should a consumer, what's the price that you should pay a consumer for their data? And I believe that the price of that is outstanding service. Are you using it well and giving them great service? And if you're not doing that, then there's a good chance you may or may not get good, accurate data. But I think it's about using it really well in a respectful manner. And that's how you get a good exchange.
Yeah, so the branding, anybody else?
I think there's a quantity and quality paradox as well, right? Which is if you're, you know, a lot of us in marketing use things like registration, firewalls, and things like that. And what we find is a lot of the first-person provided data, if you can keep that small, often you can complement that with other data sources and try to get that initial nugget clean and accurate, as opposed to, you know, you pop a big form up in front of somebody, you might get 1 or 2 decent fields, and the rest is going to get, you know, quickly much worse. Yeah. So I think there's a correlation between quantity and quality that we often miss out on.
Okay. No.
Yeah, I think I have the same perspective that you ask for the bits, and then it's back to identity resolution, is identifying who that person is and what else can you append to that data and then route it accordingly.
What about social profiles? Social profiles are data that the customer will input themselves usually, but it's one step removed from filling in a form, as you're saying, Andy. What is the accuracy of customer profile, the efficacy of customer profile data that's filled out for social profiles and using those?
I personally think this is where context is really important, right?
Sure.
So if you look at anyone's social profile, something like LinkedIn, where somebody's essentially advocating for themselves, you probably get about the same level of accuracy as you get in a resume, which is probably mostly accurate with a little bit of overemphasis. But I think if you go to consumer-centric models, companies that are listening on Facebook and Twitter and things like that, there it's really about context, right? If I'm interacting with an airline and I've made them part of the conversation, then there's probably a lot of accuracy to the detail I'm providing. If I'm generically saying, you know, I need to find a better airline to fly, and all of a sudden 6 airlines come contact me, that's not real genuine. So I think it's a lot about context and really kind of understanding when it's a real engagement and when you're just listening and getting clues and things that you don't want to turn around and surprise somebody that you're paying attention to.
Sure. Phil?
And it's content and objective. What's your objective in getting the data? And really at the end of the day, social's more about engagement. And I think I wanted to draw out that word that you brought up, Andy, because, you know, and so if you're using the data as part of an engagement, a genuine engagement with the customer, you're going to be dealing with behaviors. You're going to be dealing with their thoughts, how they connect with you as a brand, and so it's not an issue of accuracy. You know, is the age exactly right? That's irrelevant at that point. It's really about how do you draw out the engagement and where do you begin an engagement based on some of the inputs that you're seeing that you can pull from social.
So, Phil, you're saying the accuracy of the data, you know, within a range might be important, but the actual, you know, accuracy of that specific piece of data isn't. Can you elaborate on that?
So I think it's more about the engagement. So you think about companies that are engaging with their consumers on Twitter.
Sure.
Right? And so if somebody's in the market for the car, what matters is that they're in market for the car and they're in conversation. And in order to bring the conversation, it's it's awkward to start a conversation about buying our automobile if they're in the middle of some other kind of a conversation and you have a different data point that says they're in market for a car. You've created a bad engaging experience. You've just changed their topic. And so what you want to do is you want to be in context. And so if you're in context, the details of the data aren't as relevant for that perspective.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about aggregating customer data, because we're in a panel with the data-driven customer data and customer profiles. A lot of the power of big data is being able to aggregate a lot of these profiles together and either get a better accuracy or at least a bigger breadth of data in those profiles. Can all of your companies deal with, the big data issues and the amount of customer profiles that eventually, or the amount of data in a customer profile that eventually then allows you to either sell that data to someone else or be able to take that data and create actions upon that. Can one of you speak to a little bit about aggregation of different customer profile data? Shashi?
Also kind of building back to your previous question, right? Accuracy and completeness should always be driven by what business problem you're trying to solve, right? So for example, if you're trying to get a complete picture of the universe of customers you can be targeting, it's really important that you get every piece of external information possible, and completeness becomes very important there. On the other hand, if you're trying to make a statistical decision about, you get 100 leads, and you need to make a good decision about which 30 to forward to sales, frankly, if you got it 10% wrong, it doesn't really make a huge difference, right? Okay. So there's different levels of sensitivity, both in terms of the accuracy you're going for and the level of completeness you're going for, depending on the problem you're after.
Okay. No, you do?
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to the problem you're trying to solve.
Okay.
So
what do you mean by that?
So if you're looking for a lead that's got a certain server brand, right? Or you need an information about, how many hospital beds they have, right? So as you aggregate the data, really you need to look at, what pieces do I need to aggregate?
Sure.
So that I can make an appropriate decision and link it all together.
Okay.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about building customer profile. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Phil. Sure.
So some of the real benefits of aggregating data from multiple sources, there's a tremendous benefit from an accuracy perspective. It allows you to better evaluate sources on an individualized basis. And so what we're able to do is, as we aggregate multiple data sources, we have an algorithm that compares like fields from multiple sources, searching for outliers. And as we find outliers, we flag outliers. As we see them, if the same data source is consistent in outlier, we throw that out of the database. We throw that whole source out. And it's a way of using data from multiple sources as a proxy for accuracy. Okay. And that's some of the real benefits of aggregation.
Of aggregating, going from multiple sources at once. Yeah. You tend to get the outliers out so it makes it more accurate along the way. Okay. What I was going to say then after that was just building customer profiles. Let's go through, each of you do this in your own companies, right? And each of you monetize customer profiles along the way to sell those profiles to other companies. What's the process of building a customer profile now in the age of big data? How has that changed, and what makes it either easier or harder now since there's multiple data sources that are out there to choose from?
Well, I think there's two perspectives on this. One is I think building richer profiles is a lot easier. There's a lot more data out there. It's really about relevancy, and I think everybody on the panel, I'm sure, would speak to trying to drive relevancy. I would also say, though, one of the things that comes out of these richer customer profiles, and you talked about the aggregation, is also the use cases. We went through this a lot at Data.com, where we shifted our product when we originally acquired Jigsaw. We were very focused on marketing use cases, where you took a lot of data in aggregate, you ran it through a system where you wanted some percentage of it to fall out as being accurate, right? Marketers can tolerate a certain bounce rate and those kinds of things, and I think that's true of most of these profiles. And we've transitioned our product to being more about helping individual salespeople. And what happens there is an individual salesperson is looking at a record of a specific person they want to sell to, and that record has to be right. So we've really changed the way, not right or wrong, just different. We've changed the way we think about what's critical to aggregate for a profile, and are people dealing with those in aggregate across lots of profiles, or are they dealing with individual profiles that have to be correct? And I think that's where the whole world of social gets very interesting, because it's one thing to target a group of people that I believe has a high likelihood of being interested in something versus having an individual on the phone and trying to drive an interaction based on knowing that they have an interest in something. And I think that's where these profiles have really started to change. And you look at what even just the vendors on the stage, the different approach we have to these profiles has really changed a lot based on those outcomes and how we view what's quality data and what's aggregated data.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to pick up where you were just at, since we have a few of the big, I guess, databases of customer profiles up on stage here with Dun & Bradstreet and Data.com and Rapleaf data. What are the differences between the way that you guys sort of aggregate that data or build the customer profiles that maybe you guys could speak to one by one on what makes it unique with building a profile on Data.com versus building a profile on Dun & Bradstreet, or best practices, I guess it would be?
I guess, for Rapleaf, I think one of our big differences is where we start.
Yeah.
So we start with the email address as being the center of a profile or of an individual's universe.
And why do you do that? What's the...
So we placed a bet, frankly, that number one, that an email address would become a stickier data point.
Sure.
So if you go back 10 years ago, email address was not a sticky data point. We used our work email address for personal, or we used the email we got at our ISP, and so our email address was very dependent on because of where we live, and if we moved, it changed.
Yeah.
But with Gmail, Yahoo addresses, our emails are staying with us. So number one, it's a sticky data point, so it's a great data point to center around. Number two, it's a fingerprint to your digital experience. When you buy any mobile device, the first thing they ask you when you register it and you start to load it up is your email address.
Sure.
It still connects to all of your devices. And so we've chosen, because of that, to build a database that was email-centric. The other thing, because we've done that, it allows us to fuel real-time data solutions as opposed to building the database that was centered around a postal address.
Right.
And so everything we thought about was how do we play in digital, bring data to digital, and how do we play in real time? And so for us, the big difference is our starting point.
Starting point. Okay. Noam, what do you say to Phil, or how do you guys differ when you're building Dun & Bradstreet data?
So we look at it a little bit differently from the DUNS number perspective, right? And tying it back to a commercial entity. And ultimately, we look at it in a couple of steps. The first really being around the correct identity resolution. So making sure that you know exactly who that customer is, tying it back to the DUNS number. And once you have that DUNS number, as we look at now, you can connect all type of other data points to that DUNS, right? So that could be traditional firmographics, it could be vertical data, healthcare data, et cetera. And the second key is really having the processes to keep that data refreshed and up to date. So it's both tools as well as corporate processes to make that happen.
Okay.
Right?
Perfect.
I think Data.com probably shares both these models in some way. We're focused from a contact perspective. We do actually use their business email as the unique identifier, and we crowdsource this large set of business contacts. It's entirely B2B focused, but then we match those contacts to the D&B asset and tie those to a corporate entity as well. So we're actually kind of building a relationship between these two concepts. But what we do with the data and how we build the data is, I think our approach is unique in that we're actually not as data-centric as traditional data providers. We're very focused on the use case of the Salesforce.com application. So when I think about what am I going to do with my data asset, the use cases around my data asset, it's actually because my development team sits with the team that builds the Salesforce.com product, and as they're building out a new workflow, a new use case, a new set of screens, my team's trying to identify what data would be useful to advance that specific workflow, that specific use case. So it's a very kind of use case driven approach that leverages other data providers to kind of integrate that into the application.
Okay. Shashi with Lattice Engine?
Sure. So we are a little bit different from the three of you in that we usually actually sit on top of other people's data. But we do have a collector, a search engine that goes out and looks for information on what's happening to the company level. So for us, the unique identifier is actually the URL of a company. And bringing that together, so you asked this question about big data, there are two levels of complexity. One, with 20 million plus businesses, there's just a humongous amount of data to deal with. if you add to that all the internal data that's captured through products and logs and CRM, you have, the volume is very large. And then you start adding all the buying signals that we track, and then we're talking about thousands of buying signals. So you have to simplify it in some way. And that's where the modern data science and predictive analytics helps you figure out what are the few things that actually matter.
Yeah. Okay. Let's change gears here and talk something a little interesting that I even remember the first time I used Rapleaf data. The cool to creepy continuum, as Fatemeh had called it in her original questions. I remember the first time I used Rapleaf to kind of assess myself, right? And was really surprised at the amount of information that was out there tied to my email address. And the same thing can happen now with a lot of the other data that's out there. We've done it with data.com, more from a business perspective than a personal perspective. It's starting to get better. I mean, we've done these conferences in the data space for about 2 or 3 years. The first year we did it in 2011, you had a lot of people that the cool to creepy continuum, where it was really focused on the creepy side, and having access to any of this personal data was a really big no-no. It started to now be a little bit more acceptable. But I'd like you guys to talk about the experience you guys have had in that space, right? And the evolution over the last 2 years with the cool to creepy, or maybe let's say creepy to now cool, or maybe the other way around. So, anybody have that?
Well, first off, I only know about cool, so I can't speak for creepy. But what's really actually happened is over time, we've gone from, the data world, we got ahead of the game. We got this ability to bring in lots of data, use machines, do some really interesting things, build great profiles. And then we brought in, then came the analytic engines, tools that help make sense of the data. And now what's happening is where the place where we make data actionable,
yeah,
those tools are catching up. And as those tools are catching up, they're also bringing in best practices about how to not just make them actionable, but strategies around that. And so what it comes to is it's about using great practices. It's about the best practices that keeps people from, putting together, frankly, creepy creative that freaks people out.
Yeah.
And so as I believe, and I think if we're talking about emergence, right? And as I believe we're going to see a tremendous growth in the applications that make the decisioning usable. And as you see that, we're going to see an emergence of better, amazing, interesting practices in sort of automation, multi-channel. And so we're going to be able to take that journey from optimizing the campaign to somewhere closer towards optimizing for the individual.
Well, and I think a lot of this is expectations in the marketplace as well, right? So, when we train people in PR, we often tell them, think about what this would look like on the front page of the paper. Mm-hmm. I tell my team when we talk about data privacy, would you sit down with the person you're getting data on and tell them this is the data that I'm getting? And if it's creepy, then it's creepy. Like it's the simple test. And what's interesting is it's not a black and white issue for any given company or any given space. So for example, when we introduced the social key in data.com, which was this ability to map your business identity to social identities that person had connected to their business identity, right? Like when I speak at a conference, my LinkedIn handle and my Twitter handle tend to show up. So I've connected those concepts. When we built that, we built this thing called the trust layer. And the whole point of the trust layer was to tell each company that was going to use the social key that they would have knobs and switches and controls to set their preferences, right? What makes sense for a financial institution might be different than a consumer products company. And not only that, but I imagine those expectations will change over time. And the example I use with people is when I used to interview someone 3 or 4 years ago, if they showed up at the interview and they said, I know all about you, I've been looking you up online and I've read all these profiles, I would have been really creeped out.
Right.
And today, if I interview somebody and they haven't at least taken the time to look at my LinkedIn profile, I don't hire them. It's like they haven't done their homework, right? And I think that's pretty universally true. That norm has kind of shifted.
Sure.
So what we tell companies is, think about having that conversation with your end customer about what data you're collecting, and then realize that over time, those norms are going to change, and you need to think about how your data strategy changes over time.
Yeah.
It's not about the technology, it's about that customer trust and that relationship that you're building, which is why you're trying to get the data in the first place. So if you're undermining that with your data strategy, you're kind of doing it wrong.
Yeah. Okay. We are going to do one last down the row. I'm going to ask you to, in 30 seconds or less, give me one best practice in building customer data profiles and also the future in the next year or two of data-driven customer profiles and where the space is going. So Phil, we'll start with you.
Okay. I feel like I should have sat in the middle. So from a best practice, I think that when you think about a customer experience, at what point will a customer likely to spend the most money with a brand that they're following or that they've opted into? Or at what point are they going to be able to build that relationship? And it's at that point when they first provide that email address to their customer. And so I think a best practice is to give them an incredibly great engaged experience with some of your earliest tools. So whether it's the confirmation of the opt-in, whether it's the welcome letter that you might send out, or the purchase confirmation. How do you give them an amazing, great, engaged experience right out of the gate so that you can begin to have that relationship get kicked off in a good way? What was the second part?
Where is this going to be in the next year? The future of data-driven customer profile.
I mean, I think, frankly, what we're going to see in the next year is two things. A lot of catch-up for companies that are way behind.
Sure.
Because the tools are getting better, they're getting cheaper, and they're getting easier to use. And the other thing I find incredibly exciting about the space is big data, lots of data. It used to be a luxury of the Fortune 500. But now we've all built platforms, we all have tools that allow small companies to be incredibly smart, use data, compete, and grow faster because of it. And I think we're going to see that continue to accelerate.
Perfect. Shashi?
So in terms of a best practice, I think, don't boil the ocean. Know what problems you're trying to solve, and then work back from that towards what data profiles you need to use. In terms of predicting the future, I think two big things are going to happen. One, nothing is really going to stay private anymore. The shift of what's public just keeps moving, and it's true about companies as much as it's true about individuals. And two, what we call recommendation systems or things that kind of suggest what to do next, they're going to creep into really every application in the world. So we're going to see much more of that.
Perfect. Andy?
I think my experience, I've been at Salesforce.com for about 18 months, has really been that this 360 view of the customer is manifesting itself in these applications, right? You're not going to trust a 23 or 24-year-old person on their first job who's at the call center to look through a Twitter feed and make a decision on what to talk about. You have to prep that, put it in the app, and drive it through the workflow. So I would say I think the customer profile, this concept of one profile, is going to shift to a view of a profile that manifests itself in these different customer-facing applications, and that technologies that support those applications and support kind of a network data model where things like the DUNS number become really important so that each app is working off the same piece of data but goes and gets the data it needs for that customer profile is where this is really moving. So my advice and my prediction would be if you work in data and you're building profiles, you should be connecting with the critical customer-facing applications and understanding their use cases and trying to scope the data more narrowly to those use cases.
Perfect. No?
So I think as a best practice, what we see with a lot of customers is let's call it garbage data at the end. So I would say one is the entry point. So when the data comes in, really to do the identity resolution. So whether it's through a web form, whether it's through a conference, so that when it gets into the marketing automation system, the CRM, it's clean data from the start. And that's going to allow for better decisions downstream. And as we look at the future, I think it's going to be more, data is going to become more linked. There's going to be more columns, and really the analytics that come out with a better next action.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thanks, guys. That's the end of the panel. I want to thank you guys for coming out. And if the audience has any questions, we're going to get off stage because we're running a little late here. But anybody can go talk to them as we're off the stage. So thank you guys. Thank you, Phil, Shashi, Andy, and Noam. Appreciate it.